Hey there, fellow travelers of the stars. What if I told you the most feared defender in a galactic war wasn't a soldier, wasn't a warship, wasn't even armed, at least not the way you'd expect? What if the galaxy's finest laughed at a quiet human farmer, right before his wolves tore through their battalion like dry grass? If you're ready for a tale of underestimated strength, loyalty sharper than steel, and vengeance running on four legs, then settle in. Don't forget to like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more human supremacy sci-fi stories every week. Now let's begin. The first time the Thalrics saw Farmer Jack Branson, they laughed. Not cruelly, yet, but with the self-assured arrogance of those convinced they were above everything they saw. His home, nestled on the outer stretches of Viridian 3, was a patch of earth in the middle of a red and violet wilderness. A solar barn, a rickety comm tower, and fields lined with hand-grown crops. It was quaint, almost archaeological, in a galaxy where food could be printed. He didn't wave as the hovercraft passed overhead. Didn't nod, didn't even glance up from the soil he was tilling by hand. That alone amused the Thalrics observers. Humans, with their soft skin and laughably short lifespans, rarely showed such disregard for authority. One leaned forward in his velvet seat and made a remark in his native tongue, something like, "He doesn't even look up. Perhaps his skull is too heavy." The others chuckled. Branson dug deeper into the black soil. Nearby, something shifted in the tall grass. The aliens didn't notice. They never did. A week later, two Thalrics officers arrived on foot, flanked by a squad of bioarmored enforcers. They came under the banner of territorial assessment, but it was clear to anyone paying attention that they were sizing up resistance. Jack stood on his porch as they approached, arms crossed over his chest, dust covering his forearms. He didn't smile. "Jack Branson," the lead officer said, consulting a floating data slab. His voice was smooth, polished like a merchant's knife. Jack nodded once. "We're from the Thalrics Integration Force. You've been designated a non-compliant settler. Your farm operates without planetary standard tech. Your livestock are unregistered. And you've been observed ignoring planetary curfews." Jack looked past the officer to the horizon. "It's my land. I tend it how I want." The Thalrics officer chuckled as if hearing a child claim dominion over the ocean. "This isn't Earth, Branson. You're not a sovereign nation. You're a squatter in Thalric space. I settled this land before you people could even pronounce the system's name," Jack replied. "You want my land? Buy it. Otherwise, get the hell off it." The officer's chuckle faded. He stepped forward, but a sudden growl, deep, low, guttural, froze him in place. It came from the treeline, dense and quiet at the farm's edge. The enforcers snapped up their rifles. "What was that?" one whispered. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he turned and stepped inside his house, the door creaking shut behind him. The aliens stood there for another 30 seconds, scanning the trees, unsure whether they were being watched by eyes they couldn't see. Then one of the soldiers swore and ordered a retreat. Later that night, under the purpling sky of twin moons, Branson sat by a flickering old-world lantern. A battered photo of a woman and two children rested near his cup of brewed leaf water. Outside, heavy paw steps circled the house. He didn't look up when the screen door creaked. A silhouette filled the frame, a massive beast coated in dark fur, with eyes like embers and a presence that could freeze blood. It padded in, quiet despite its size, and sat beside him. "You spooked him," Jack said softly. The beast huffed. He reached out and rested a hand on its broad skull. "Still got it." For the Thalrics, the laughter continued. Reports of the human farmer were passed around as a source of entertainment. They exaggerated the encounter. Some said the human waved a wooden stick at them, others claimed he mumbled curses in ancient Earth dialects. They didn't mention the growl, or the way the shadows had pressed in around them. That part unsettled them, though none dared admit it aloud. But not everyone laughed. At a Thalrics military outpost 10 clicks from Branson's farm, Commander Vrel reviewed the reports with a hardened stare. He was not bred for aristocratic amusement. Vrel had served in the suppression campaigns on Rygos and led the glassing of Seraph 9. He knew that planetary resistance rarely looked like armies, it looked like silence. It looked like a man who didn't care if you pointed a plasma rifle at him. Still, the higher-ups found him too paranoid. They dismissed his concerns as relic instincts. "The man is a farmer," one diplomat told him. "He plants food. He waters dirt. He is nothing." Vrel disagreed, but he nodded and smiled as all good soldiers do when facing political walls. Meanwhile, Branson kept to himself. His farm thrived under the dual suns, even as Thalric's patrols thickened around the region. Crops grew with impossible health, the irrigation lines gurgled with clean water, and his livestock, quietly moved into underground pens, remained unseen by all. But whispers grew. Children from nearby human settlements whispered about black wolves with red eyes. A young boy claimed he saw one rip a raptor beast in half. His father slapped him for lying, but the story spread anyway. Mothers told their children not to stray near Branson's lands. Not because of the man, they'd say, but what walks beside him. A trader, passing by for surplus grain, noted scratches along his hauler's hull the morning after staying near Jack's farm. Couldn't have been an animal, he said. Too precise. 3 straight lines. Like claws, drawn with intention. The Thalrics began tightening their net. More patrols. More scans. Drones buzzed over Branson's land, taking atmospheric samples, soil readings, biological signatures. The results came back, strange. Too clean. Too controlled. The data implied environmental regulation systems, advanced biotech, and unknown energy signatures buried deep beneath the house. When officials confronted Branson about it, he only stared at them. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Just stood there, framed by the rising sun, a silent wall of flesh and intent. Then a patrol disappeared. 5 soldiers. Standard sweep. Never returned. The command post sent a search team, only to find pieces. Not bodies. Pieces. Stripped armor. A single weapon barrel bent backward like it had been twisted by a machine. No signs of combustion, no energy blasts. Just claw marks. Deep ones. Vrel didn't laugh when the report hit his desk. Neither did anyone else. The official story called it a native predator. But native predators didn't take out armored soldiers silently. They didn't avoid drone sensors. They didn't coordinate attacks so well that not even a distress ping got out. He authorized a direct approach. Bring him in, he ordered. By now, the settlers were speaking of Branson like a ghost story. The man who lived with monsters. The one who buried sons of empires and tilled his fields like nothing ever changed. Some admired him. Others feared him. A few started asking questions. Who was he before the farm? How did he get the land? Why were there no records of any registered earth livestock on his property? But no one confronted him. No one dared. Until the Thalrics did. They came at dawn. 2 transports. A dozen soldiers. Heavily armed. Backed by ground drones and a command skimmer. The mission was to search the property, scan the substructure, and detain the human for questioning. The commander stepped out first, armored and proud. Jack stood at the edge of his field, shovel in hand, dirt still clinging to his boots. He looked at them. Said nothing. We're coming in, the commander said. Jack didn't move. A warning was given. Still Jack stood. Then something howled. From the tree-lean shadows moved. 6 of them. Tall, silent, massive. Their eyes glowed as they stepped into the light, ringed in dust and morning mist. Each was larger than any natural predator should be. Their fur shimmered like polished obsidian. Their teeth caught the light. The Thalrics raised their rifles. Jack didn't blink. You sure you want to do this? The silence that followed wasn't human. It was older. Hungrier. And it moved. The soldiers didn't fire. Not at first. For a heartbeat, they stood in paralyzed silence, confronted not by beasts but by something altogether foreign, too intelligent, too still. The dire wolves didn't growl. They simply watched. Waiting. Tension thickened in the early morning air, and even the drones above seemed to falter, their stabilizers whining against a sudden gust that came from nowhere. Commander Thalrics, the officer leading the operation, took 1 step forward. His exosuit whirred, amplifying his stature, blue armor glinting in the sun. Stand down, he barked. By Thalrics Directive 47. A single low whistle from Jack cut the air like a scalpel. The wolves vanished. Not backwards, forward. They surged like black lightning. One leapt high, striking a drone with precision, tearing through metal and sensors. Another darted between 2 soldiers, slashing their legs from under them with terrifying speed. Cries rose, plasma bolts scattered across the field, but none found targets. The wolves were too fast, too deliberate. Every strike was clean, coordinated. Jack didn't move. He stood with the shovel still in hand, eyes on the commander as his animals dismantled a superior force in under 60 seconds. 3 soldiers lay groaning on the ground. 2 others fled into the forest, only to be swallowed by the tree-lean. 1 drone spiraled into the dirt, trailing smoke. The rest had either escaped or were dead. Thalrics raised a trembling arm. What are they? He asked, voice cracking beneath his helmet. Jack's eyes didn't shift. Mine. The commander took a cautious step back. You're harboring military-grade bioweapons. That violates. They're not weapons, Jack cut in. They're family. One of the wolves, larger than the others, scar bisecting one golden eye, appeared beside Jack, panting softly. Its mouth and claws were slick with something darker than blood. Telrix didn't stay to argue. He activated his beacon and disappeared in a flash of blue teleportation. A coward's exit, Jack thought. His wolves didn't pursue. They stood at the edges now, silent again as if the violence had never happened. Within the hour the story had spread. The local settlement knew before sundown. A broken squad, beaten and humiliated, had been driven off by a solitary man and his pack of monstrous hounds. Word reached beyond the farms and domes, flowing through communication threads like wildfire. The human settlers spoke in hushed awe. Some called Jack a living relic, a ghost of war past. Others said he was a genesmith, a craftsman of lost earth biology. But the truth was simpler. He had prepared. He always knew someone would come. That night, Jack sat on his porch with his wolves circling the property. He scratched the neck of the scarred one. Rook. He whispered something to it. Rook lay down at his feet, letting out a deep sigh like the war was done. But it wasn't. Not even close. Commander Vrel read the report in silence. He didn't blink. Across his desk sat Telrix, visibly shaken, one arm in a sling, and the smugness burned out of him. Vrel dismissed him with a flick of two fingers. He already knew what Branson was. Not entirely. But enough. Back during the Outer Rim purges, Vrel had encountered something similar. A covert Terran unit operating with organic symbiotes, barely detectable by sensors. They'd called themselves the Grey Soil Division. Most were wiped out before the surrender. The survivors vanished into the colonies, untraceable. It would explain Branson's discipline. His stillness. His monstrous companions. Vrel leaned back and summoned a planetary scan. Branson's farm blinked at the edge of the map, inconspicuous as ever. But it was not the farm that worried him. It was the silence. Every hostile zone he had ever entered had the same pattern. Laughter, then discomfort, then silence. That silence always came before death. He authorized a lockdown on Viridian 3. No one in or out without clearance. Surveillance increased. Satellite eyes were fixed permanently on the Branson property. Branson ignored it all. He kept farming. He fed his wolves. He maintained the irrigation system and kept the solar rig humming. Every day, he walked the perimeter of his land, one hand always resting against a wolf's shoulder, like they were extensions of himself. Occasionally, a drone would buzz too close. A whistle would sound, a leap would follow, and debris would fall from the sky. The wolves never missed. Still, Branson didn't speak much to the others. The settlers kept their distance, but that didn't stop them from watching. One child, maybe 8 years old, worked up the courage to sneak through the fence one evening. She found Rook waiting for her and for a moment froze in fear. But the wolf merely lowered its massive head and sniffed her fingers. Jack watched from the porch, not interfering. When she looked up at him, wide-eyed and trembling, he nodded. She smiled. Then she ran home. The Thalrics weren't smiling. Weeks passed. Another patrol disappeared, this one armed with heavier weapons, motion sensors, and EMP grenades. Not a trace returned. Their final log was a burst of static and a blur of black shapes. Vrel visited the site personally. He stood among the shattered remains of their transport, shredded metal, clawed earth, bones stripped of armor. No blast marks. No plasma burns. Just raw, natural death, surgically executed. Wolves don't do this, the scientist beside him whispered. Vrel said nothing. But in his mind, something ancient stirred. Not fear, something older than that. Recognition. Later that night he called in reinforcements. The settlers felt it first. The air grew tense. The sky buzzed with new ships arriving in orbit, their silhouettes blotting out stars. Checkpoints appeared along roads. Human laborers were scanned and herded. The Thalric soldiers now came in silence, helmets locked, weapons charged. This wasn't integration anymore. It was preparation. Jack noticed. He stood at the edge of his property and watched the horizon darken with enemy presence. His wolves lined up beside him, 6 in all. Rook the largest, Shade the fastest, Hollow the quietest, Ember with her violet eyes, Scarab the tracker, and Wren the youngest, still learning, still hungry. He knelt, one hand on Rook's back. "Time's coming," he said. The wolf growled low. The others echoed, soft ripples of sound that shivered through the soil. At midnight, Jack entered the underground shelter beneath his house. It was older than the farm above, older than the Thalric's occupation. Steel walls lined with old earth tech, dusty but functional. He pulled a case from the shadows, unlocked it with a retinal scan and opened it. Inside were old tags. A photo. A knife with a smooth grip and blood-blackened edge. A folded flag bearing an insignia almost erased by time, a gray wolf head over soil. He didn't put on armor. Didn't load weapons. He touched the flag. Then the knife. Then stood. Outside, the wolves howled as one, shaking the trees for miles. At Thalric's command, every scanner lit up at once. Movement. Massachusetts patterns resembling squad-level tactics from animals. One officer stammered, "Sir, are those things coordinating?" Vrel's jaw tightened. "They're preparing." A junior analyst whispered, "For what?" Vrel didn't answer. He knew. The attack began just before dawn. Mist crawled low across the fields, dampening sound and light. In the haze, it was difficult to tell where the earth ended and the sky began. It was the kind of silence that didn't settle, it stalked. Every tree, every blade of grass stood still, as if the land itself knew what was coming and chose not to interfere. Thalric's command didn't wait this time. They moved with calculated aggression, deploying 2 full dropships, 30 combatants each, outfitted with reinforced exocets and precision rifles. Drones fanned out ahead like hunting hawks. Motion sensors, heat trackers and seismic probes turned the forest into a grid of data. Commander Vrel stood aboard the command platform overlooking the operation. He wasn't interested in half measures. He'd read enough battlefield reports to know Branson wasn't a man to leave breathing. This wasn't an arrest. It was a decapitation. From above, the farm looked peaceful. Rows of crops, dew-flecked leaves shimmering under first light. The barn stood unchanged. The porch empty. No movement. That should have worried them. One of the captains on the ground, armored from neck to toe in battle-sheen black, stepped forward and issued a final warning through a loudspeaker. "Citizen Branson, you are in violation of Thalric's planetary sovereignty. Stand down and submit for detainment or we will neutralize." There was no reply. Not immediately. Then a faint whistle. High, short like a bird call, too soft to register as threat, too casual to stop movement. But to the wolves it was a command. The field exploded. From the far tree-line, shadows lunged forward. 6 dire wolves, each more than 2 meters at the shoulder, moved like living missiles. They didn't roar. They didn't howl. They hit with surgical violence. One crashing into a line of soldiers from the side, toppling them like skittles. Another leapt a full 30 feet to take down a drone mid-air, dragging it screaming into the dirt. Plasma fire erupted. Blue bolts lit the sky, turning morning into false lightning. The soldiers formed ranks, firing in tight formation. Their training held for the first minute. Then it began to unravel. The wolves didn't just charge. They coordinated. Hollow emerged from a shadow beneath the barn and darted between legs, taking down a gunner with a slash to the back of the knee. Ember weaved through gunfire like she could see time, latching onto a commander's throat before the scream could escape. The Thalric's line collapsed inward. From the far end of the field, Jack appeared. Unarmored. Unarmed. Just a man in boots and a faded jacket, walking through gunfire like he was strolling to check his irrigation lines. The wolves shifted around him, intercepting fire, taking hits and returning death. His presence didn't demand attention. It commanded it. Vrel watched from the command platform, face grim. "He's directing them," he said. "Without tech." "Impossible," an officer whispered. "There's no neural relay. No implants." "It's not tech," Vrel replied. "It's trust." On the ground, Rook slammed into a heavy mech suit, claws finding weak points in the armor. Sparks flew. The pilot inside screamed. Jack raised one hand, flat palm, subtle, and Rook disengaged, vanishing into the smoke just as a second mech fired a plasma burst into the first, missing its real target. Confusion bred panic. Soldiers began firing at movement, any movement. The wolves blurred into the haze. Jack kept walking. A Thalric's captain tried to rally a fallback squad, only to find Ren waiting beside him, silent, teeth red. The captain didn't have time to scream. 10 minutes in, over half the force was either down or missing. Vrel issued the order: withdraw to fallback coordinates. Regroup and initiate burn protocol. Flames erupted in the woods. They tried to raise the forest with thermite drops, hoping to force the wolves into open combat. But the fire didn't spread. A controlled line of irrigation channels, hidden in the underbrush, stopped it cold. They had prepared for everything, except that the farmer knew his land better than they knew their battlefield. As Theoric's forces retreated toward their drop zones, Jack turned back. He didn't chase them. The wolves didn't pursue. They stood among the burning wreckage of machines in silence, watching the invaders flee. One wolf limped, bleeding. Another panted heavily, flanks scorched. Jack knelt beside them, quiet, pressing his palm gently against their ribs. They leaned into him like dogs tired from a long run. The farm was still standing. Damaged, scorched, but standing. From the edge of the woods, a group of settlers emerged, drawn by the noise. They came cautiously, expecting ruin. What they found was carnage, yes, but also a man and his wolves, calm in the aftermath. A young settler woman, rifle in hand, stopped a few meters away. You held them back. Jack stood slowly. For now. She nodded toward the wolves. They're not beasts, are they? He looked down at Ember, who was licking a wound on her foreleg. They're better than most people I've known. The settlers gathered. Wordless at first. Then a murmur rippled among them. They weren't just here to gawk. They had questions. They had fears. They needed someone to tell them it could still be okay. Jack didn't give speeches. Never had. But he looked at them, truly looked, and something in his quiet steadiness told them what they needed to hear. This land wasn't lost. Not yet. On the Theoric's command ship in orbit, Vrel paced before a hollow table filled with casualty reports, wreckage logs, sensor data, and biometric readings that made no tactical sense. The wolves didn't show up on half the scans. Their bodies ran cold when they wanted. Their movement patterns read like trained infantry, not animals. And Branson himself, no implants, no signals, nothing the Theorix could intercept. He was not a commander in the traditional sense. He was a part of the pack. A living link. Vrel knew what would come next. The High Circle would demand escalation. Orbital strikes. Purge-level clearance. They'd want to flatten the region to assert dominance. But he also knew the cost of that kind of fury. Because if one human farmer and 6 wolves could do this, what else had Earth left behind in exile? He pulled up a file from 2 decades ago. A sealed report. Gray soil division. Biogenic loyalty programs. Psychic imprinting through exposure, not technology. Organics trained to fight alongside humans, not beneath them. It had been shut down. Or so they claimed. But Jack Branson had never been part of the official roster. Because Jack Branson had never needed orders. He had a family. And they bled for him. Vrel closed the file. He understood now. This wasn't an insurgent. This wasn't resistance. It was a warning. And they had ignored it. Down on Viridian 3 the fields burned low. Smoke curled toward the sky, thin as memory. Jack sat on the porch, watching the horizon. Rook lay beside him, breathing deep. The others were resting. Wren paced near the barn, eyes always scanning. The sun climbed higher, golden and wide. It would be back soon, the war, the fear, the next wave. But for now there was only silence. Jack reached down and scratched behind Rook's ears. Still with me? He asked. Rook let out a low, contented breath. Good, Jack said. We're not done yet. The dawn after the battle rose like a held breath, slow, uncertain, painted in ash-colored light. The wind moved gently across the farm, as if unwilling to stir the silence that followed blood. Smoke from charred soil clung to the air, drifting over empty helmets and twisted armor. The wolves had gone quiet. Not from exhaustion but watchfulness. Jack stood in the field again, boots dark with soot, eyes toward the tree line. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The wolves patrolled in shifts, their movements more precise now, more deliberate. Not once did they cross onto the charred ground where the Theorix had fallen. That was sacred in its own brutal way. Jack didn't disturb it either. The settlers returned in greater numbers this time. Men with tools, women with carts, children holding their parents' hands. They moved slowly, cautiously, as if afraid they might be walking into a myth made flesh. Some came to see the wolves with their own eyes, but most came to see the man who had stopped an army. Jack didn't greet them. He simply resumed planting. One by one the settlers began helping. Without instruction. Without discussion. Rows were cleared. Irrigation lines mended. A new roof beam lifted onto the barn where the old one had burned. By mid-morning the farm breathed again, scarred but still living. At midday the wind shifted. Jack paused mid-shovel. Rook, who had been dozing near the trellis, snapped awake. His head rose sharply. Seconds later, all 6 wolves had emerged from shadow and brush, drawn together like magnets to a shared pulse. A sleek transport ship descended from the clouds, slow and silent, unarmed. Its undercarriage opened with a hiss of pressurized air, and from it stepped a single Thalric's figure. Unarmed, dressed not in command armor but in ceremonial diplomat's robes, a deep black with silver edges. Jack wiped his hands and walked forward. The wolves moved with him, fanned out like sentinels but didn't growl. Not yet. The diplomat stopped 30 feet away. No soldiers. No drones. Just a single pulse beacon in his hand. I am Envoy Krith, the alien said. His voice was softer than the others. Measured. His eyes, too wide and too pale, flicked toward the wolves then back to Jack. I come without arms. I seek no battle. Jack didn't respond. Your actions, Krith continued carefully, have created considerable disorder. You should be erased for them. Then do it, Jack said. Krith blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of it. You're not here to threaten me, Jack added. You're here because someone's scared. Krith exhaled, a faint tremor in the motion. You've embarrassed the Dominion. But worse, you've introduced a variable. One we cannot control. I didn't introduce anything, Jack said. I just never gave up what I had. Krith looked down at the pulse beacon. It blinked softly. The high circle debated orbital strikes. A full purge. But the projections. He hesitated. They estimated survival odds for your wolves at 17%, even under saturation bombardment. 17. That was enough to hesitate. Jack nodded. Good. That means you're learning. Krith took a step closer. Rook growled and the envoy stopped instantly. This is not a negotiation, he said. Then why are you here? Krith raised his head slowly. Because I saw the footage. All of it. I saw you walk into gunfire. I saw them move around you like limbs on a single body. I've seen death all my life, Branson. But I've never seen loyalty like that. You can't engineer it, Jack said. That's what scares you. Krith didn't deny it. He looked around, at the settlers fixing fences, at children staring at the wolves with cautious wonder. They'll make you a symbol, he said. A rallying point. I didn't ask for that. No. But it's done. And now even if we kill you, your name survives. A myth walking with monsters. 1 man and 6 wolves. Jack stepped closer now, voice steady. They're not monsters. And I'm not a myth. I'm just what happens when you push too far and don't bother to learn who you're pushing. Krith stared into his face for a long moment. Whatever threat he'd been sent to deliver dissolved there. He had no teeth sharp enough for this man. No tools that hadn't already failed. He handed Jack the pulse beacon. Jack took it, frowning. That's a transmission code, Krith explained. To a secure Thalric's channel. If your people are targeted again, use it. Someone might listen. He turned and walked away. Not another word. He boarded the ship alone, and it lifted without ceremony, vanishing into the morning sky. Jack stood there long after it disappeared. Behind him, Ember whined low. I know, he said, pocketing the device. It's not over. Just paused. The next few days were quiet in the way that made people uneasy. No ships passed overhead. No patrols returned. And for the first time in years, the settlers began venturing out after dusk. They brought gifts to Jack's farm, seeds, tools, homegrown preserves. No one thanked him directly. They simply gave and nodded. Jack accepted everything. The wolves stood by him for every exchange. At night, he sat by the fire outside the barn. The wolves curled around it, their presence warmer than any flame. Jack stared at the sky, the stars sharp and innumerable. Rook rose, stretched, and lay his great head in Jack's lap. Jack didn't speak for a while. Then, you did good, boy. All of you. The others raised their heads, ears twitching. They understood. Maybe not every word, but enough. Emotion carried what language could not. He leaned back, eyes closing. For a moment there was peace. But it didn't last. 2 weeks later, the early warning sensor pinged. A frequency too clean, too deliberate to be weather. Jack moved fast, waking the wolves, checking the perimeter. The signal wasn't local. It was coming from the edge of the system. A flare of energy, a Thalric ship. But it didn't descend. It didn't hover. It detonated. An orbit. A self-destruct. Controlled. Jack frowned at the readout. Why send a ship just to destroy it? He didn't have to wonder long. A message pinged from the beacon Krith had given him. A single line of text. That was not ours. Be ready. Others have seen what you've done. Jack lowered the device slowly. So it begins again, he thought. He looked to his wolves who had already risen, alert. No commands needed. They had known before he did. More were coming. Not just the Thalrics. Others. Those who wanted the wolves? Those who wanted to clone, to dissect, to use? Jack stood. And for the first time in years he opened the weapons cache buried beneath the barn. Inside were Earth-made tools. Old gear, reliable. Gauntlets, knives, grenades laced with impulse. Things the wolves understood and remembered. Jack strapped one to his forearm, exhaled, and turned to the forest. "We defend the home," he said simply. Rook barked once. The others moved like shadows. The myth was alive now, not in whispers, but in howls that echoed over the valleys. They had laughed at the farmer. But they weren't laughing anymore.